Keralatine Namaskaram. It is my pleasure to be here to read to you some of my poetry and to talk with you a bit about Hebrew language and poetry, and maybe, if time allows, also about poetry at large. And maybe I will say something about poetry before I start reading anything. I think in India it goes without saying that poetry is a form of inspiration and revelation, and perhaps just a word about this before I'll go on. Philosophy, the famous authorized professional of our culture about wisdom, becomes less convincing when one considers wisdom. Philosophy is speaking about wisdom and insight, but it holds thought with thick pliers, plenty of heavy, slow words that clumsily catch hold of ideas that wisdom grasps in the blink of a moment. Only unique philosophers like Heraclitus and Plato, like the author of the Gita, or like Abhinavagupta, to name but a few, only philosophers who had the poetic gift could deal with this electric intensity of thought. It seems only poetry does to words what thought is doing to them, in their full power and scope, hears them, tastes them, understands and misunderstands them, combines them in strange ways, gets carried away by them, beats them against each other, tells. Poetry truly tells, through words, everything they can grasp and more. Poetry holds words alive in the moment they are formed. Throughout the ages, poetry has been providing human society with a sense of existential meaning beyond the dry facts and the ability to touch the essence of our lives. It gives expression to the basic set of things we have in common: thought and feelings, creativity, imagination, and sense of freedom and beauty. Poetry would say, never mind the facts, mind the truth. So let me start with a sort of invocation, with a poem dedicated to language itself. I'll read it first in my language, in Hebrew, and then in English. השפה אומרת. השפה אומרת, מאחורי השפה עומדת שפה. שפה היא עקבות, עקובים משם. השפה אומרת, שמע, עכשיו. אתה מקשיב? היה פה הד. קח את השתיקה ונסה לשתוק. קח את המילים ונסה לדבר. מעבר לשפה, השפה היא פצע, שממנו ניגר וניגר העולם. השפה אומרת, יש, אין, יש, אין. השפה אומרת, אני. השפה אומרת, בוא, נדבר אותך. בוא, נמשש אותך. בוא, תגיד שאמרת. Language says. Language says, before language stands a language. Language is traces, stand by over there. Language says, listen, now. You listen, here was echo. Take silence and try to be silent. Take the words and try to speak. Beyond language, language is a wound from which the world flows and flows. Language says, is not, is not. Language says, I. Language says, come on, let's speak you. Let's touch you. Come on, say, you have said. One of my thoughts here was that language, in general, sifts the world, sifts it for us and shapes it into a mold of ready concepts and descriptions of reality. The Babylon of languages doesn't present only a challenge of communicating the human reality. It's not a question of different words. It's a whole range of various sensibilities, epistemologies, and cultural traditions that differ considerably from language to language. Just the same, I try to convey in this poem how at the moment of inspiration the poet is, so to speak, possessed by language. This may seem to some far-fetched, but in fact this is often the case. Aside from our built-in sensory experience, language is our first teacher of reality. Before I go into this, let me read you a classroom poem titled Poet. And this classroom in the poem was basically my own classroom, as I remember it from elementary school. At that time, we still had a bell, an actual bell that was ringing when the class was over and we'd rush out of the classroom. However, bear in mind also John Donne's famous lines, "Don't ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee, for a whole life is passing in the blink of an eye in this poem." Poet. Teacher is speaking. He hears her. There are no words there, only music. Two trees sway in the window, ink shapes in the notebook. He counts the dream shapes, two trees, teacher is speaking, his lover closes a window. He sits in the margins of the page, trees sway in the notebook. His heart is turning with the clock, and now the bell. He closes his eyes, hears. There is no words here, he writes. I will not go on with such philosophical statements about language and languages, at least not before I demonstrate some of what I stated. So let me tell you a little bit about my own language, that is about Hebrew language and Hebrew poetry. We are used to regard the Old Testament as a religious scripture that was translated in the past to European languages and actually every language, and is read today in archaic vernaculars. But this is not the case for the Hebrew speaker. Since Hebrew was revived as an everyday spoken language at the beginning of the 20th century, a linguistic gap of 2,000 years was bridged. On the one hand, nowadays an Israeli school kid can read and understand the Old Testament in its original tongue. And on the other hand, if biblical King David would have come back to life, he could have lived through a contemporary Hebrew poetry book and he would have little difficulty with its language. Besides its spiritual and historical contents for the Hebrew reader, the Bible is a literary heritage rich with rhythm, music, and forms of speech. Most of the Bible books are pure poetry of various styles and themes. The stories of creation and of the patriarchs, victory and love songs, prophecies, hymns, etc. In short, the beginning of the Old Testament is also the beginning of documented Hebrew poetry, about 4,000 years ago. Nevertheless, Hebrew poetry didn't end with the canonization of the Bible, and even after the destruction of Judea by the Romans at the beginning of the first millennium AD, Hebrew literature had been created continuously in the Jewish diaspora. The ancient language of the scriptures hasn't been spoken in everyday life for 2 millennia, but went on being studied and used in prayer, even by laymen. In every Jewish community, religious and secular Hebrew poetry has been composed throughout these generations, in the East and in the West, in far and near countries, in regions located now in Iraq, Spain, Italy, Yemen, Russia, or Germany, and more. Some of the first sonnets in Europe were written in Hebrew by Emmanuel the Roman in 13th century Italy, whereas Hebrew poetry written in Moorish Spain was influenced by Arabic poetics. Hebrew poetics forms were introduced into Christian liturgy as early as the 6th century AD by Romanos Melodos. And on the other hand, for centuries, Hebrew poetic tradition has been enriched by other traditions in style, in theme, and in lyrical forms. Yet, not unlike Latin, it lacked the vivid aspect of everyday colloquial speech. But this was to change with the rise of Zionism at the turn of the 19th century and with the return of the Jews to Israel. There's no other example, I think, in human history of a successful revival of an unspoken semi-fossilized language, such as Hebrew was. The task was huge. Linguists reconstructed the language and innovated or brought back to use thousands of Hebrew words. Fierce debates were taking place. Which Hebrew pronunciation should we adopt from the several Jewish traditions? Should we base modern Hebrew on biblical syntax or rather on a later one? Many loanwords were replaced by Hebrew ones. Slang and various grades of speech had to be introduced. In this endeavor, poets of the age like Bialik, Chernyakhovsky, Shlonsky, and others were the leading force in putting the renewal of Hebrew speech into practice. And until the middle of the last century, their works were celebrated both for their poetical merit and as national achievement. However, it took 3 more generations until Hebrew became a truly modern language. These immigrant poets who started writing in Hebrew in the beginning of the 20th century had a huge task of bridging traditional poetry and modern poetry, exploring free verse, tonal meter, etc. in Hebrew, and making them an organic part of Hebrew verse. To a large extent, they had to adapt European models in order to create modern poetry in Hebrew. For them and their generation, creating a fluent poetic expression in an acquired language was the main challenge. I will not go on here further into lecturing you about Hebrew poetry in detail, but it will suffice to say that our linguistic and poetic condition has changed considerably since then. Thanks to these poets, what was a terra incognita at their time is our natural inheritance today. In this ongoing creative work of Israeli poets, the language is continuously unveiled through poetic expression. Nowadays, even though immigration to Israel is still taking place on a large scale, most of the writers there are natives of the country, and their mother tongue is Hebrew. No wonder contemporary poetry in Israel feels free to embrace and even mix a large variety of styles and forms, both traditional and modern, in order to answer the needs of specific themes and atmospheres. For example, in my own generation, we wouldn't hesitate to mix in our poems biblical connotations with contemporary slang, a freedom that would have been unthinkable to previous generations. To the native Hebrew poets, the Israeli reality and the unique possibilities and limitations of Hebrew became the unquestionable basic condition. As for myself, I find this freedom rather basic and quite intriguing. To make the point clear, in certain poems I found it natural to draw from classical Greek allusions side by side with biblical ones, or even Indian, while at the same time I actually spoke about my own experience and used colloquial language. In other poems, I may have done just the opposite and used modern circumstances to enlighten some character or story of the classical tradition. Personally, I also took a major part in fostering the new generations of young poets, founding the Hebrew-Arabic Helicon Poetry School, and helping this young, created actually a whole method of teaching poetry, and many of my students are nowadays senior poets. Okay, on the whole, I must say, I'll conclude it by saying I feel lucky to be able to write poetry in such a language which is new and at the same time so ancient, in a language that that even today still feels rooted in poetry. This kind of statement needs perhaps a short explanation. Now, how is Hebrew rooted in poetry, and what are these poetic traits unique to Hebrew? I'll get back to this later, but let me first read to you a few poems. The first one that I will read to you, The Barbarians, Round 2, is a sort of chat with the famous poem of the renowned Greek poet Kavafis, Waiting for the Barbarians, and was actually read in his 100 years memorial at Athens. In Kavafis' poem, the barbarians are expected at the border of the kingdom. They are viewed in his poem as a kind of solution for the speaker's decadent society, but they never come. In my poem, they do come, and you please find out where from. The Barbarians, Round 2. It was not in vain that we awaited the barbarians. It was not in vain that we gathered in the city square. It was not in vain that our great ones put on their official robes and rehearsed their speeches for the event. It was not in vain that we smashed our temples and erected new ones to their gods. As proper, we burnt our books that have nothing in them for people like that. As the prophecy foretold, the barbarians came and took the keys to the city from the king's hand. But when they came, they wore the garments of the land, and their customs were the customs of the state. And when they commanded us in our own tongue, we no longer knew when the barbarians had come to us. Thank you. My second poem is an example of the fusion of cultures and themes that I mentioned before. It evokes the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. You remember Orpheus, a wife, Eurydice, dies, and he goes to the underworld to bring her back. And the gods of the underworld allow him to take her on one condition, that when he walks out, he never turns back and look at her. Yep. Otherwise, she goes back to the dead. So it evokes the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, with allusions to Jesus' sayings and the Lord's Prayer, and to Anna Frank's diary that she wrote hiding in the attic during the Holocaust in Amsterdam. However, primarily it deals with existential issues, with our own mental and spiritual state. The Orpheus Prayer. Death, and yet more death. Sand, and more sand. We have stood in the square, hungry to be, and like mountain shadows, cover the city with pictures of a waking sleep. Was she there, or wasn't she? A stranger in my body, able and yet unable, I tread the air. How many more years will we walk these dead sands? The mountain is glimpsed like a vision or a mirage. Sands move on underfoot like a memory with no beginning, and each place is every place. Does the way go up or down? Are you here behind my gaze? Is my gaze there ahead of me? Where have we come from? Alone, the two of us have crossed the vast marshes on the slowly melting faces of the drowned. For years, we've been immortal. In the attic, in Amsterdam, we saw terrible sorrow in the window. How much longer shall we walk between death and death, sand and sand? A new past give us, a new death give us. Give us this day the life of the day. The unique complexity of Israeli society and culture seems at times fascinating and at times unbearable. It seems to be a bridge or sometimes a limbo at the point where East and West meet. Israel has about 3 million Jews whose families emigrated or were expelled from Arab countries, as well as 2 million Palestinians. And the other half, about 5 million, came mainly from the West, many of them as survivors of the Holocaust in Europe. My own grandparents came from Poland and were the only survivors of families that were murdered by the Nazis. Although I knew their entire family perished there, they refused to tell me anything about these horrors. So there was no talking about that. However, this silence went deep, and many years later, without a second thought, I found myself turning down all invitations to give readings in Germany, and just the same, after publishing my first book in Poland, I refused to go there for the launch. To make a long story short, the invitations kept coming and forced me to explore the matter through and beyond the silence that shrouded it since my childhood. The outcome of this introspection was the poem I'm going to read to you. It is an imaginary meeting with an ex-Nazi officer in a German beer parlor, let's say in some Bavarian beer parlor, where I give him the mic to speak his mind. And one more thing, there's one German expression in the poem that you may not be familiar with. Arbeit macht frei. Arbeit macht frei means work sets you free. This slogan was inscribed on the gates of Auschwitz in the extermination camp to make the Jews believe they came there for forced labor, while in reality they were put to death in the gas chambers. A glass of beer. The perfect murderer has no reasons, he said. The perfect murderer needs only a perfect object, as it was in Auschwitz. Not a crematoria, of course, but as it was afterwards, outside working hours. And he fell silent, looking at the froth on the beer and taking a sip. The perfect murderer is love, he said. The perfect murderer doesn't require anything perfect except giving as much as you can. Even the memory of gripping the throat is eternal. Even the howls that rocked my hand, even the peace that fell like grace on cold flesh, even the heel of the boot awakens another eternity. Even the silence, he said, looking at the froth. True, a decent Arbeit macht frei, but a perfect murder doesn't spill a drop. Like the lips of a child, he explained, like sand and froth, like you, listening, sipping, listening. Thank you. Another note about this, and now as a poet, when I write about something, I enter it, and this, whatever it is, enters me. I become it, so to say. So, for example, if I write about a blooming tree, it is fun, it's a joy. But in this poem that I've just read to you, I had to summon up the demonic parts in me to give voice to the speaker. Why do it? Well, Jews often call the Nazis monsters and think of them as inhuman abominations. But looking in, I understood that just the opposite is true. The Nazis were human. And what they did, as horrible as it was a human choice, a human option. And this terrible human option is there in all of us, within our psyche. So if we don't want it to erupt again into reality, if we don't want to meet it outside, we better acknowledge it and face it. So in this poem, I kind of exercised this silence of my family about the Holocaust and set myself free. After that, I visited Poland and Germany many times, but this is a different story. Well, to change the mood, death, pain, and sorrows are part of our human lives, but let me gradually mix it with the brighter side, love, life. The next poem I'm going to read to you is a sort of eulogy for a loved one. It's titled More. So I don't even look at you, but prefer the window, and the eye, dappled black and gray, is zooming in to discover the broken outlines of a growth whose heart is one and invisible. Like an elephant's dry skin, grooved with islands ancient, the olive tree gathers its folds into a concavity of old shadow-sunken curves, returns to stretch in ridges roughened by the sun's touches. There, above a hump of a peel, a baby leans towards a breast, a rusty nail. Beyond this, I don't look, don't think. How can I think about leaves turning silver outside in the twilight, about the sky above them, above my gaze? How can I think about infinity and the void now, when you are about to die? And as you are about to die, how can I not think about you? How? Think perhaps about loved ones who haven't yet been, maybe even about those who are alive. Think that even in this there is still a thought about you, and even believe it. Can I be that strong only because of what you've done to me now, because you are dead? Tomorrow I write you a few words, an epitaph, or at least a note, something poetic. For example, here lies a dancer. And if this isn't enough to bury you, I'll elaborate for sure. Water me, I write on the marble. Water me, I'm thirsty. Water me and not with water. Water me and not with clear logic. Water me and not with a name. Water me and not with wine. Water me and nothing else. Water me. Beauty won't do, love won't do, God won't do, even this life won't do, nor any life. Water me, I'm thirsty. In face of both our individual and collective journey, with its traumas and challenges, horrors and beauty, let me add a short poem of hope for the road. I'll read it in English and then in Hebrew. 7 lines to sunset. 7 lines to sunrise. And despite it all, life. Despite it all, love. Will indeed see the heart's gate open to a world of hope. In its path, we'll stride again, wondering at its beauty. Our spirits clear and peaceful will indeed see the rising morning, the coming sunrise of men. שבע שורות לזריחה, ואף על פי כן החיים, ואף על פי כן אהבה. ראו עוד נראה את שער הלב, נפקח אל עולם של תקווה. בשביליו שוב נפסע, על יופיו נתפלא, ורוחנו צלולה ושלווה. ראו עוד נראה את הבוקר עולה, את זריחת האדם הקרבה. As you can maybe hear, the original Hebrew, like in many of my poems, is rhymed and metered, a quality that was lost in translation, of course. And this is often the case in translation, especially to English, I think. But when it comes to Hebrew, form is not the only loss. And let me add another note to my introduction about Hebrew language and poetry regarding the full play of meanings which Hebrew allows. Hebrew is a Semitic language, akin to Arabic and, or to Aramaic, which is now hardly spoken. In Semitic languages, words are based on consonants that form roots, whereas vowels serve to express shades of the different meanings. For example, in English, the words leave, love, and leave have a similar ring, but different origins and meanings, whereas in Hebrew, the words lev, meaning heart, and livlev, meaning flowered, do share a common root and are etymologically connected. In the same way, you can still hear the link between man, Adam, and earth, Adama, or between womb, Rechem, and compassion, Rachamim. Yeah? These links are not due to sound coincidence, but because they do in fact share the same root meaning and the same image that the language created. Because Hebrew was not in everyday use for 2 millennia, Hebrew doesn't have a large vocabulary also. It doesn't slice the world into thin slices, but because of this, Hebrew often relies on the single word or the single root rather than on the syntax and phrase. Each word may contain several meanings depending on the context. And these diverse meanings are all connected through the logic of symbol and metaphor. And actually, you can use more than one meaning to convey double sentences. For example, the words hypocrite and painted are the same word in Hebrew, tzavua. Hebrew tells us that the hypocrite's face is painted, hiding his truth. The English hypocrite comes from Hippocrates, Greek for actor. Greek actors weren't painted but used to wear a mask, to cover the face. The actor's true face was covered. However, this meaning origin isn't common knowledge for English speakers, whereas tzavua is absolutely transparent to every Hebrew speaker. One more example, in Hebrew the words abstract and stripped or unclothed are all denoted by a single word, mufshat. Again, abstract is originally a Latin word, but for English speakers it's not transparent. To Hebrew, abstraction is simply something which is stripped off, devoid of materiality and sensual perception. To the Hebrew reader, these metaphoric connections are evident without any preliminary explanations. I say this not to glorify Hebrew, for I have written in English too, but, and I love it, but this immediacy of ideas and feelings and this linking of various phenomena of our reality are what makes Hebrew, for me, such an attractive language for poetry. Okay. Let's go back to poetry itself. And go back also to our existential striving to be and to expand life and consciousness. I read 7 lines to sunrise as an antidote to our experience of pain and death, but let me also contradict myself and also argue that pain and death are part of this expansion. I look through the monkey's eyes. I look through the monkey's eyes as they play with my skull in the rooftops, in the treetops. I'll start again. I look through the monkey's eyes as they play with my skull in the treetops. I am lifted with the eagle as he flies, because my entrails are in his. In the belly of the earth, I crawl with worms who ate my eyes out of their sockets. I'm green, I grow in the grass, that my rotting flesh makes rich. O my body, how you have grown. I will read a few more without any further explanations. The temptation. This was the temptation, to rub the I against the you, our thought against its images, to feel. We were there before, you remember, without mother or father, without navel, marked only by the first cut, free of weight, measurement, destruction. We wandered inside each other, dreamt worlds, lived. But the stakes were too low. The risk, only a game. Desire was action, instantly complete. And that's the way, remember, we got here too, by a single desire, by a glance. And now we are here in the viscous air, rubbing this in with effort. Every single sensation, every meeting. Our suns rise and set. Our worlds get old. But here, suddenly we find a new wrinkle in our soul. And this is for real. It's real. Finally, we can lose, destroy. Finally, we are alive. For a moment, we can even die. Thank you. Lessons. 1. Early in the morning, I wish to learn the language of swaying branches in the wind. 2. Blow at me too, wind. Teach me to sway words into spirit. 3. Open my branches. Teach me to be the tree that I am. 4. From the depth of humus to the scent of flowers, my good weight, my standing, my life. 5. Leaves rise and leaves fall, as do I. Thank you. I will read the next poem, one before the last, in Hebrew only. And I would like to invite my friend and colleague, Sachit Anandan, to read it to you in his translation to Malayalam. And this is a good time to thank you, Sachi, for this gift you gave us all here, and this unique poetry gathering. Please come on stage. No? Okay, I'll read it in Hebrew and then you will, you're reading the Malayalam. Agadat Boker. עם שחר קם איש ופתח חלונו, קו שמש ממזרח ועד ים, ונגע עד ליבו והאיר יגונו, ויאמר יפה העולם. ויאמר על מה כה נדכאתי מרה, מה חלום בי עבר, אתעורר, עולם חדש לי הבוקר אברא, אהיה, אין מתי אחר. אל עולם העלים אקום ואצא, אגע בליבו הירוק, כפרפר הרפרף בין פרחים ואמצא את סוף החיים המתוק. אז יצא, לא הרחיק, 10 צעדים, חפים מחיים שהיו, עם שחר צעד מול מזרח מאדים, ועיניו נפקחו וראו. 10 צעדים, לא יותר, בשבילו, ארוכים מחייו שעד פה, בתוך רגע הצוף, מי ידע את מולו, 10 נצחים, מי יספור? אי פעם, אי שם, אל עדן נשכח, עם שחר קם איש ופתח.
ഇപ്പോൾ ഹീബ്രുവിൽ വായിച്ച കവിതയുടെ പരിഭാഷയാണ്. ഞാൻ അമീറിൻ്റെ കുറേ കവിതകൾ വളരെ മുമ്പ് ഇതിനു വേണ്ടി ചെയ്തതല്ല, വളരെ വർഷങ്ങൾക്ക് മുമ്പ് ചെയ്തതാണ്. അതിലൊന്നാണ് ഇപ്പോൾ വായിച്ച കവിത, പുലരിയെക്കുറിച്ച് ഒരു ഐതിഹ്യം. ഒരാൾ രാവിലെ ഉണർന്ന് ജനൽ തുറന്നു. സൂര്യൻ്റെ ഒരു വര കിഴക്ക് മുതൽ പടിഞ്ഞാറ് വരെ അത് അയാളുടെ ഹൃദയത്തിലെത്തി. അയാളുടെ ദുഃഖം തിളങ്ങി. അയാൾ പറഞ്ഞു, ഈ ലോകം എത്ര സുന്ദരം. പിന്നെ പറഞ്ഞു, എന്താണ് ഞാൻ ഇത്ര വിഷാദിയാകാൻ? എന്ത് സ്വപ്നമാണ് എന്നിലൂടെ കടന്നുപോയത്? ഞാൻ ഉണരട്ടെ, ഇന്ന് രാവിലെ തന്നെ ഞാനൊരു പുതിയ ലോകം സൃഷ്ടിക്കും. ഇനി നീട്ടിവെക്കലില്ല. ഞാൻ എണീറ്റ് ഇലകളുടെ ലോകത്തെ സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യും. അതിൻ്റെ പച്ച ഹൃദയം സ്പർശിക്കും. ശലഭത്തെ പോലെ പൂക്കൾക്കിടയിൽ പാറി നടന്ന് ജീവിതത്തിൻ്റെ മധുരമുള്ള അമൃത് ഞാൻ ഉണ്ണും. അങ്ങനെ അയാൾ പുറപ്പെട്ടു. അധികം പോയില്ല. 10 അടി. ഭൂതകാലത്തിൽ നിന്ന് മുക്തമായ ഒരു ജീവിതം. പ്രഭാതമായപ്പോഴേക്കും അയാൾ തുടുക്കുന്ന കിഴക്ക് നോക്കി നടന്നു. അയാളുടെ കണ്ണുകൾ തുറന്നു. കണ്ടു 10 അടി മാത്രം. പക്ഷെ അങ്ങോട്ടുള്ള ദൂരം അയാളുടെ ജീവിതത്തെക്കാൾ നീണ്ടതായിരുന്നു. അമൃത് കണ്ടെത്തിയാൽ പിന്നെ ആർക്കാണ് ഇന്നലെയെ തിരിച്ചറിയാനാവുക? ആർക്കാണ് 10 അനന്തതകൾ എണ്ണാനാവുക? ഒരിക്കൽ ഒരാൾ രാവിലെ ഉണർന്നു. വിസ്മൃതമായ ഒരു ഏദൻ തോട്ടത്തിൽ എത്തിച്ചേർന്നു.
Thank you, Sachi, but don't go, please. Before I pass the mic to you all for questions, let us sum up this reading with the unsummable. Would you please read When I Came to God?
I need to leave 10 minutes for questions from the audience, but before that I will read one or two more. വായിച്ച ഒരു കവിതയാണ് ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ. പാഠങ്ങൾ. 1. വെളുപ്പാൻ കാലത്ത് തന്നെ എനിക്ക് പഠിക്കണം കാറ്റിലാടുന്ന ശിഖരങ്ങളുടെ ഭാഷ. 2. എന്നെയും കുലുക്കൂ കാറ്റേ, വാക്കുകളെ ആട്ടി ആട്ടി ആത്മാവാകാൻ പഠിപ്പിക്കൂ. 3. എൻ്റെ ശാഖകൾ തുറക്കൂ, എന്നെ ഞാൻ എന്ന വൃക്ഷമാകാൻ പഠിപ്പിക്കൂ. 4. ഇലകൾ ചീഞ്ഞ വളത്തിൽ നിന്ന് പൂക്കളുടെ സൗരഭ്യം വരെ എൻ്റെ തൂക്കം, എൻ്റെ നിൽപ്പ്, എൻ്റെ ജീവിതം. 5. ഇലകൾ വിരിയുന്നു, ഇലകൾ വീഴുന്നു, ഞാനും. യഹൂദരുടെ ദൈവം. സർവശക്തനായ ദൈവമേ, യഹൂദരുടെ ദൈവമേ. രണ്ടും തമ്മിൽ നല്ല ചേർച്ച. യഹോവ, യഹൂദർ. ഞങ്ങൾ തെറ്റു ചെയ്തു, ഒറ്റുകൊടുത്തു പിതാവേ. അങ്ങ് പുറത്താണ്, ഞങ്ങൾ അകത്തും. ഞങ്ങൾ ഞങ്ങളല്ല, ഞങ്ങൾ നല്ലവരാണ്. സ്വർഗത്തിലുള്ള ഞങ്ങളുടെ മറുവശമേ, ഞങ്ങൾ നിന്റെ മുന്നിൽ പാപം ചെയ്തു. ഞങ്ങൾ ഞങ്ങളുടെ പ്രവൃത്തികളല്ലാതെ മറ്റൊന്നുമല്ല. സർവശക്തനായ ദൈവമേ, യഹൂദരുടെ ദൈവമേ, ഞങ്ങളെ അവിശ്വാസികളാക്കാതിരുന്നതിന് നീ അനുഗ്രഹീതനാകുന്നു. മുഖമില്ലാത്തതിന് നീ അനുഗ്രഹീതനാകുന്നു. നിനക്ക് ജീവചരിത്രങ്ങളില്ലാത്തതിന്, ഭ്രമങ്ങളും നിസ്സാരതകളും ദൈവീകമായ പുഞ്ചിരികളും ഇല്ലാത്തതിന്, നിനക്ക് പേരില്ലാത്തതിന് ദൈവത്തിന് സ്തുതി. നീ കുരങ്ങിനെ കണ്ണിൽ നിന്ന് നോക്കാത്തതിന്, നിനക്ക് വേരും ഇലയുമില്ലാത്തതിന്, നീ ഞാനല്ലാത്തതിന്, നീയല്ലാത്തതിന്. സ്വർഗസ്ഥനായ പിതാവേ, ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് ഉപജീവനം തരൂ, ക്ഷേമവും വിജയവും. ഞങ്ങളുടെ സ്വർഗത്തിലെ കണക്കുകളും അതിൽ വരവ് വെച്ച പ്രാർത്ഥനകളും ഒരുപാട് പലിശ കൊണ്ടുവരട്ടെ. ഞങ്ങൾ നിന്റെ ആതിഥേയർ, നിന്റെ കൊട്ടാരത്തിന്റെ സമാധാനം കാർന്നു തിന്നും ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് ഞങ്ങളുടെ അന്നാന്നത്തെ ദുഃഖം തരയണമേ. പിതാവിനോട് പുത്രരെന്ന പോലെ ഞങ്ങൾ ഞങ്ങളുടെ പാപങ്ങൾ ഏറ്റുപറഞ്ഞുകൊള്ളാം. കോഷറാണോ അല്ലയോ എന്ന് മാംസവും ആത്മാവും പോലെ, ആദമും ഹൗവയും പോലെ, ഞാനും നീയും പോലെ ഞങ്ങൾ ഞങ്ങളെ തന്നെ നിനക്ക് മുൻപിൽ പകുത്തുകൊള്ളാം. നിന്റെ പാവനമായ നഗ്നത ഞങ്ങൾ ഇന്ന് മറയ്ക്കും. നിന്റെ രൂപമില്ലായ്മ, നിന്റെ ശൂന്യത, നിന്റെ ആഴം, ജലത്തിനു മുകളിൽ പാറി നടക്കുന്ന ഞങ്ങളുടെ ആത്മാവും. read a short one and yeah. Because it's called the end.
I read the English.
You're reading.
When I came to God. When I came to God, I came blind. I heard all around me the song of his longing, his growl, his sigh, his slaughtered lowing. I touched with my palms his leaves, his down, the breath of his mouth, his back, still warm. When I came to God, I came naked, tainted by his smell, voice, and handprints. He was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. He was expelled, a fugitive and vagabond. When I came to God, I whispered to him, "Know yourself," and I hugged myself. When I came to God, I came alone. Thank you, and if you have any questions, please.
Hello, sir. So you talked about the attempts to revitalize the language after the re-establishment of the Jewish state in the 1950s. So people returned from different parts of the world. So obviously this language was in contact with the different languages and cultures. So when you tried to reinvent or revitalize this language, what were the challenges that you faced? Was Hebrew language receptive to changes from different languages, words from different languages and cultures?
Well, yes, because 2,000 years have passed. The world has changed. In King David's time, there was no television. There were no psychology as a term, etc. So many words had to be renovated, innovated. Some were reconstructed from Hebrew roots, and there was a lot of work to make this possible. And as I mentioned, poetry has a huge role in this to make it a natural speech. Yeah, and also I think because people came from all over the world, and only fifth of the population was there before. The rest were refugees from Europe and Arab countries, and without any means and without any common language. So Hebrew also, I think, was benefited from this bad situation where people had to find a common language.
There is a Nazi lurking in every individual. There is a Nazi, as your poem conveys, a potential killer in every one of us. It was what H.G. Wells also says, man is a born criminal or a born killer. And the NASA of US started from the migration from Nazi Germany, started NASA in US. That is what I gather. Then my question is regarding, with all courtesy to Sachidananda Maharaj, do you endorse Adorno's view that after Auschwitz, there is no poetry possible? Do you endorse that view? After the Holocaust, no poetry writing is possible. It was said by Theo Adorno.
Well, I think this is a more emotional than rational statement. The subject of poetry is life. Any facet of life. It can be love poetry, it can be political poetry, it can be about horrors, it can be about beauties. The Holocaust was part of life, unfortunately.
Thank you for a wonderful session. It was fantastic, and thank you for wonderful translations. Wonderful and read also very well. What I feel from your poetry now, because I'm listening to you from a long time, it is more universal. And it, like when it was translated into Malayalam, it looked like Malayalam poetry. If I translate into Hindi or Bengali, it will be look. So it is a great, it is actually a good thing that your poetry is universal. Do you think that sometimes you have to go to root and find something from your mythology? Because this is one of the, as you say, the roots and all these, we also had in a Vedic Sanskrit around roots and all, without root, one root work in many words. So we also had the same structure in Vedic Sanskrit. So can you go back and bring something from your mythology in some poetry now, or you are becoming universal only?
Well, I think my specific roots are in the language, but my roots are not just Israeli or Jewish. I mean, we have a common heritage. We're all humans, and I feel that I write to humans as a human. I happen to be born in Israel, that's fine. I was raised in Israel, that's fine. But we're all humans. We all understand the human condition. We all feel pain and we all feel joy. And this is the standpoint of a poet for me. Yeah? So I can bring Orpheus, or I can bring Karna, or whichever myth that is our common heritage. But whether it's, I don't know, Achilles or Arjuna or whatever, we are talking about the human condition. These are just images to touch it.
What do you think about the contemporary situation regarding Israeli and the situation of her?
Well, what does it matter what I think? You know, I'm not a politician. I'm a poet. Of course, I regret any atrocities, any violence. I think we should share on this earth. But I don't try to play a politician, and I'm not a spokesman of any government or any organization or ideology. I do things my size. What is my size? I started this Hebrew-Arabic school, and there, you know, people were sitting and translating each other from Hebrew to Arabic, Arabic to Hebrew. And then starts a dialogue where people see each other as human beings. Wow, that's what you thought about us? Really? And a dialogue starts, a human dialogue, which is prevented normally by both sides in everyday life. And poets are the speakers of their societies. So this was very important, because, you know, peace is not only about finding some agreement in Camp David or wherever, Oslo. It's not this, where both sides are traumatized, and these are traumas of generations. Nakba, Holocaust, horrors that we have to deal with, that we have to free ourselves from. And as far as I can, I do that. With working with myself, first of all, and with my students and my colleagues. But I don't play the government, because I'm not. If there are no more questions, I'll thank you, and thank the Sahitya Academy for this opportunity. Thank you for being here.